Welcome to Anything is Possible, the Boston Celtics podcast here on the Athletic Podcast Network. I'm your host, Sam Jam Packard, professional sports fan, and I am joined, as always, by the kid, the god, the legend, Celtics beat reporter for The Athletic, Jay King, ladies and gentlemen, and we are coming to you in which has been a relatively quiet week for the Celtics in terms of their offseason. I mean, we got week one. They traded Kemba for Horford. Week two, they picked up or hired Ime Udoka to be their new head coach. Really, the only thing that's happened this week is that they introduced Ime to be the coach, and they had their opening press conference. Jay, you were there. You were watching. I guess, what was your biggest takeaway from that press conference, and how do you think the Ime era has gotten off to a good start? That was a bad question. I'm sorry, but you know what to do. Just
I think the one thing I've gotten from both that press conference and talking to people around the league and people from Udoka's past, he kind of seems a lot like Brad Stevens, just a tougher version. Like, the more I talk to people about him, the more his even-keeled nature and his steadiness and his intelligence come up. And you can kind of see the shades of Brad. And he's just like so I think that's one of the things that stood out. Another thing that stood out from that press conference is he continuously referred to Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown as the two pillars. And that was after Brad, kind of after the season ended, came out and said and he became the president of basketball operations, came out and said, we're going to try to make decisions to maximize our wings. So basically, like, the Celtics have handed over the franchise sort of to Tatum and Brown and decided that they need to do what's best to maximize those guys. And I think that's actually pretty important because they haven't really done that yet. Like, it's obviously the obvious choice, right? Like, of course you make decisions based on Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, but to this point, the Celtics really haven't had the opportunity to do that because first, Kyrie and Al Horford were there, and then Kemba Walker came, and Kemba was an all-star, and he was really, when he first got to Boston, the guy. And so the evolution of straddling two separate timelines versus now it's just the Tatum and Brown timeline, I think is very important.
this feels like the start, start of we're going all in on Jaylen and Jason. Like, we're going to build around them. And I thought that was like an interest. Like, he kept on referring to them as the pillars. It's like what they build their franchise around. And so I thought that was just interesting. The other thing that stood out is, like, it seems like Ime is going to be a bit of a hard ass and kind of prides himself on being a hard ass and is like, the players want me to hold them accountable and be just kind of in their, I don't know if it's going to be in their faces because he seemed like a very calm dude, but Jay King just disappeared on live television here. So I'm going to keep talking about my impressions, but it was interesting to see just like how he, I don't know, he was just willing to, one, make fun of Brad Stevens during the meeting, which I thought was great, calling out his terrible offense.
That was hilarious.
But it seems like he's like very much like these players want someone to hold them accountable. And it's like kind of, I don't know if it's like throwing Brad under the bus, but it's like definitely like he prides himself on being a tough, kind of just like a tough son of a bitch. And that's like when you read all the articles about him and things like that, that's like seemed like a very strong part of his personality.
Yeah, and I don't think that's throwing Brad under the bus at all, because I think Brad wanted Udoka because on that front he is going to be different from Brad, and so I think like Brad to me, like, if I was going to hire the guy who replaced me, I'd want someone who did all this stuff I do, right? All the stuff I do well, and then was able to improve on all the stuff I do very poorly, which there's a long list of things. So for Brad, I think he realized that, if he was, and this is just my theory, I haven't really heard this from Brad or anybody with the Celtics or anything like that, But like I feel like after this past season, especially, Brad realized, you know what, my message could get further if I was a little tougher, if I had playing experience to connect with players. And so I think those two things were important to him. And he didn't want to get someone who deviated from his values and what he thinks about the game of basketball. And, you know, Udoka, by all accounts, is a hard worker, someone who's super even keeled, like is not going to be someone who gets super hyped after regular season wins or super down after a blowout loss. But I also think Brad wanted to find someone who would have a different type of voice than he did. And I think, you know, kind of balancing, keeping what Brad considered his own strengths and what he considered, and then improving what he considered his weaknesses. I do feel like that was really important to him. And I feel like it's only natural, right? Like if you were going to hire someone to do your job as a host of Anything Is Possible, you'd probably want someone who's extremely funny like you are, who's extremely handsome like you are.
Two compliments from the kid. Keep going.
Who's extremely intelligent like you are. And then you'd probably want to find someone who like knows what's actually going on in basketball, like unlike you. Yeah. You'd want someone who no, I'm kidding. but like, you know what I mean? Like it only makes sense. And it's very rare for someone to hire his own successor. So, but it only makes sense that he wanted someone with like his strengths and who does some of his weaknesses a little better. And I think Udoka kind of, at least Brad sees him as that. That's my theory.
Yeah, and I think it just the idea that Brad's voice, I don't think he's like lost. I don't like the whole lost the locker room talk doesn't make any sense to me, but it's like it can make sense if it runs stale. Like I think Brad's specialty early on in his Celtics tenure was like maximizing players and like getting them to like, I don't know, getting Evan Turner that giant contract, or like getting these players to maximize all of their talents and like kind of overachieving. But eventually when you have
a bunch of players played their best basketball under him, especially early on.
But he seemed to like specialize with like getting these guys who kind of to maximize what their potential, but they never really had like elite star talent. And I can see where if you are a star like Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown, like you need to be coached a little bit differently. Like you maybe not need to, you still need to maximize your potential, but you're already there. You're already at that star level. Brad is not helping you get your next contract. You're already established. And it's like, if Brad comes in and is just like kind of a hard ass, I can understand if like a 23-year-old who's about to get a max deal, it just like doesn't really, it falls on deaf ears. And it's just like, especially if he's not a former player, where it's just like, what do you like really know about like, I feel like I'm oversimplifying it because obviously I think they like respect Brad Stevens' basketball mind, but I think it like if someone has gone through the NBA, you're much more willing as a player to kind of hear their kind of criticism and critiques because you know that they've gone through it too. And so I think that like it brings us to our first question is from Don. Don got him. I think we already addressed this, but I just wanted to give him the credit. It's like, I don't think we really should be concerned about like Ime lighting a fire under the team. How many like times did we hear that Brad was not enough like of a disciplinarian or like didn't fire the team up enough? I think it's like kind of the thing that this team needs in terms of intensity, physicality, all of those things that maybe were lacking last season. I think like that's the type of kind of improvement that this team needs to make heading into next season.
Yeah, and I think I do think there's something to the sense that especially like if you look at NBA history, sometimes when teams let go of a coach, they try to hire someone who's like 180 degrees opposite. And I think you can go very wrong there, where you go from like someone who's, you know, kind of a player's coach to someone who's like going to be totally on your ass, just screaming at you all the time, playing you 40-something minutes and yelling about how you suck in the press. And I don't think that the Celtics did that at all. I think what Brad did intelligently, and who knows, Udoka has a lot to prove. He hasn't coached a single game. I have very little idea of whether he'll be a supremely successful head coach. But from what you hear about him, I do think Brad like really valued the intelligence, the hardworking, the Spurs experience, learning culture under Greg Popovich. That's a master's course. You take a master's class from Greg Popovich in culture, and so Udoka has a lot of experience. And then, so I think like all that stuff is very far from what you think when you think of light a fire under a team guy. Like, he won't always be screaming at guys. He's going to build relationships with guys. He's going to have that warmer side to him that you don't necessarily get with a lot of yelling coaches. And so, yeah, I think he's going to be tougher than Brad. I think he's going to be a little firmer maybe with some of his messages, but it's not like he's going to be like Jim Boylan or something, just hooting and hollering on the sidelines, and
he's not going to take it back to the punch card system.
Yeah, no, like that's not going to be him. He very much sounds like a modern coach.
And he put such an emphasis on like relationship building, like in like, especially with the young guys and things like that. That was like another thing to take away from what was a pretty like generic intro press conference. But I thought it was like he has like existing relationships with like the pillars, as he calls them, but puts like a huge emphasis. I had no idea he was so close to Peyton Pritchard. And apparently has known him for a while.
Peyton Pritchard was just a star in Portland, man. Everyone knew Peyton Pritchard in Portland.
Apparently, I mean, yeah, he's the GOAT of Portland and just an Oregon legend. But it seems like he has all. It's just like, you're right. It's just like Brad, but a little bit meaner. And so it's like, if you were to replace me, it would be like me, but a little bit smarter, and like exactly what you would be looking for in a head coach. So I think it's everything is positive right now. Of course, I'm just like a blind optimist, and like there's no reason to think things are going to go wrong. The other thing that stood out to me from that press conference was Udoka didn't give the I guess thorough endorsement of the Celtics staff. He basically said, a lot of guys are out there. I have a lot of relationships. And that kind of, I think it brings us to our next question, where this is from Ben Anderson. What assistants do you see coming in? Will Hardy and Damon Stoudemire being rumored. I guess I'm curious what you think happens to the kind of current coaches on the roster, and what are your thoughts on Hardy and Stoudemire?
The last I spoke to the current coaches, they were just kind of still waiting to hear what's going on. And I haven't talked to any of them in a couple of days, so that could be different now. With Hardy, you hear a lot of great things about Hardy. He beat my college team by 31 points back in 2006 when I was a freshman. I played 7 minutes in that game, had 1 point or 1 rebound, 1 assist, 0 points.
You went back and looked at the box score as soon as he was rumored?
I did, because I didn't remember playing against him, but I knew he went to Williams around that time, and I was just wondering if he was on that team that we played. They beat us by 31.
What was Will Hardy's stat line? Classic J. King just looked at his own stats, didn't look at the story.
No, classic J. King. I remembered my own stats, but I looked for his stats. He played like 10 or 15 minutes, I think. But he then played on a Williams team that was much better than that one. Finished, I think, second in the country. Lost in the national championship game. But he's supposed to be one of the rising stars across the NBA from when you talk to people. I believe he's 33 years old, has already gotten interest for head coaching positions across the league. He's spent 10 years on the Spurs staff. And so that's a big hire. Like, that is a very good hire. From his reputation, like, that dude can really, really coach, and he should be seen as like a major league hire. So I think that should be a very big one.
Well, he sounds like the lead assistant type. Like, he has the resume to kind of, if he's getting head coaching interviews, like, he's going to come in and be a top person. So I would be surprised. This is me based on nothing. because everyone knows how, unless it's news about Charlotte Hornets, I have no inside sources. Like, I would be surprised if Jay Larranaga was still here, just because he's also gotten head coaching interviews. And so if they're going to bring in another kind of top lead assistants, maybe you could have two, like an offensive defense type thing. But it just seems like if also bringing in Damon Stoudemire, it makes sense that if you're going to turn the franchise over to a new coach, you're going to give that coach the opportunity to bring in his own guys. If you're trying to change the voice of the locker room, you're trying to kind of bring in a different vibe. It doesn't necessarily make sense to have all the same assistant coaches. And the Celtics have a lot of solid assistant coaches. I just when you have a regime change like this, I think it just makes more sense to bring in entirely new blood, just because Udoka is going to want to do things his way. And it's kind of weird to have guys who are hanging on from the past.
See, I don't necessarily agree with that fully. And I think when franchises change head coaches, there are a lot of times that assistants do stay. When Brad came in, he kept a few assistants.
Well, Larranaga's from the Doc era, right?
Yeah, and so is Jamie Young, and both those guys are good coaches. Both those guys would be helpful if Udoka decided to keep them around. So I think, and NBA staffs are just so big, Udoka could hire 3 or 4 guys and still have room for other guys, whether it's some of the video coordinators, whether it's some of the assistant coaches, whether it's whatever. And then the other piece of it is that Brad is still in charge, and Brad is the president of basketball operations. And obviously I assume he intends to give Udoka a whole lot of control over his staff, because Brad knows what it's like being a head coach. But Brad's word probably matters. If he says this guy would be worth keeping around, this guy we think would make a very big impact if you do keep him on the staff, that word should matter. So yeah, I don't know what they'll do to fill out the rest of the staff. I thought it was notable that Udoka kind of said, I don't necessarily need an experienced staff. I'd rather have an energetic staff. That wasn't a direct quote, but something like that. And I think that, first of all, it spoke to his confidence, I think. That he's not going to be out necessarily looking for someone who's like a Mike D'Antoni type when Steve Nash got hired by the Nets, someone with head coaching experience, someone who's been in the league for 30 years or whatever, like when Brad Stevens hired Ron Adams as his top assistant his first year. Udoka's been in the league he's been around the league for a long time. He's coached for a while. He played before that. He's basically been around NBA basketball since 2002, 2003, whatever, with a couple of years overseas mixed in. So he doesn't need necessarily the same guy underneath him that even if Steve Nash would, because Steve Nash had never coached before. He'd been around the NBA, but he didn't have coaching experience, whereas Udoka has that coaching experience. So I thought that spoke to his confidence that he can handle the job. And then I also thought it kind of gave a hint into kind of what he feels the team needs, which is energy and enthusiasm and stuff like that. So we'll see. We'll see who he hires. We'll see how the staff rounds out. But I think the Hardy hire, especially, that got rave reviews from around the league. A lot of people see him as a bright dude with a big future.
I think the other big piece, not big piece of news, obviously there's not a lot of news this week, but another piece of news was Wick Grossbeck going on Sports Talk Radio. And this question's from Philip Chineri. He said he expects a lot of moves over the next month. And what extent?
I think it's Philip Chineri.
Philip Chineri. Whatever it is, Wick said he expects a lot of moves. Philip Tionari.
By the way, for those just listening to the podcast, we are reading off a screen and we can't read. So I guess that's a little bit of an issue.
Takes, but what the hell is Wick talking about? I just don't. Maybe I'm dumb, but we've established that early in the podcast. do the Celtics have that much flexibility to make a lot of moves this offseason? I feel like they're pretty constrained by the cap. They don't like it feels like they can re-sign Fournier, and then they probably have a mid-level exception of sorts. But beyond that, I'm really kind of confused to see or to figure out what a lot of moves Wick's talking about.
Well, if you listen to his full quote, he kind of backtracked a little bit, or at least didn't make it seem like something is for certain going to happen. And I'm quoting this from Jared Weiss's story on the remarks. He said, "I'm prepared for it. Let's put it that way. I'm not saying this roster, in my view, has to change because of X, Y, and Z. I'm saying we have a new team president of basketball. We have a new coach. They're going to spend July figuring out who they want to have and what the roster is going to look like. I just want us to get farther, and it could be these guys or there could be changes." So it wasn't like he was out there, "We got huge changes coming, fireworks, guys," which is what he said, I think, 5 or 6 years ago. And people kind of clung to that one. And
that did not happen.
Did not happen, at least that offseason. So, yeah, I don't think there's necessarily any huge change coming, but I do think Brad was pretty open last year about how he didn't think the roster was good enough. And if they keep Fournier, they've traded Kemba, then they can at least convince themselves that maybe it fits better around Jason Tatum, maybe it fits better around Jaylen Brown. But I do think that they don't look at this roster right now and think this is a finished product. This is a team that's ready to be, title favorites or anything like that. So they know they have a lot of work to do. I don't know whether, major changes will come this offseason, but I also think you could look around the league and think if the Celtics had been in the 4-5 matchup instead of getting the Nets in the first round, and
who knows if Jaylen was healthy, no one saw the Hawks going this far. This is wild. This playoffs has been absolutely insane.
This has been a trash playoffs in terms of injuries and the amount of talent that is currently, or that was in the conference finals, the amount of healthy talent at least. So, yeah, but I don't think they're under any belief that this team is ready right now. And I do think over the next couple of years, there will be some significant changes as they try to build the right type of roster around Tatum and Brown to get them to feel comfortable with the organization long term. And that's what it's going to take to keep these guys, probably beyond their next contracts, or in Jaylen's case, his current contract. I guess Tatum's is starting in a few weeks or whatever it is. So there will be, I suspect, major changes, at least to the supporting cast. They will go after whatever stars if they can. But for now, I'm not sure there will be enormous changes this offseason. I think the Kemba deal gave them some financial flexibility, got rid of, obviously, a very good player still, and kind of changed the texture of the roster and to a place where I think they're in better position now, but still have moves to do to solidify the supporting cast.
That brings us to, I think it's going to be part of the podcast for the rest of the summer, but random speculation about what they're going to do with the roster. There's a lot of, I'm not going to answer that. We got a bunch of questions who do you think is going to make the jump between Peyton Pritchard, Romeo Langford, Aaron Nesmith? I have no idea. And so I'm just not going to entertain that question. I don't know how I'm going to gain any more information there. And so I'll focus on some more transactional ones. This one's from Sean RGCY. No, just Sean RGC. I should have put a space there. Why does every national reporter / pundit think the Celtics need a point guard when they definitely need more wing depth? Jay, I've been kind of curious about this too. It feels like they made the Kemba trade and everyone was like, well, they got to go out and get a backup, another point guard, or they got to get a starting point guard. It feels like to me the natural shift is Marcus Smart's your starting point guard, Peyton Pritchard's your backup point guard. Sure, I think you could use a third guard. We know Brad loves 3 guards. Like bring in someone on a veteran minimum contract, maybe a Reggie Jackson campaign type. But I definitely avoid the Jeff Teague types. But that doesn't seem like the biggest need in this roster. I think this is something you've been talking about for a while. It feels like a power forward with some size is like the biggest hole right now in terms of how the roster is currently constructed.
Yeah, I think people are probably looking at they lost Kemba Walker. They did not get another point guard in that trade. And I also think they could use at least one more ball handler. It doesn't have to be a starter, though. Marcus Smart can definitely handle the starting point guard position. I do think Jason Tatum will have stretches where he's just the team's point guard this year, where he's the primary ball handler, and I think that can work. I actually think the wing depth is in a better position now, assuming they keep Fournier. Like, if you go into the next season and either Fournier is in the starting lineup and you've got Nesmith and Langford coming off the bench, like you feel a little better because at least you know that Nesmith can handle some minutes. At least you know that Langford can hold his own defensively. Like Langford missed more than half of last season. Nesmith didn't even play for more than half of last season. So that's kind of like found money. No matter what they give you, it's found money. And I do think those guys are probably poised for at least a little bit of development, especially,
But who do you think's more ready to make the leap between Romeo and Nesmith?
I just think Nesmith was more ready last year. So I think he's probably more ready, or he's in better shape to be more ready to make the leap. So my bet would be on Nesmith. I also think his shooting could be very important to open up space for the primary creators on the team. So that would be my pick of him and Langford. But if you can get if you could get a power forward to start, and it's Marcus Smart, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, power forward X, and Robert Williams, and then your bench is Fournier, Nesmith, Langford, Al Horford, and Pritchard. Now it's like, okay, that's a 10-man rotation that you can rock with.
You know who you didn't mention there, which is music to my ears, Tristan Thompson. And is there any speculation? Like, he makes the most sense to me as someone who you would trade. He has an expiring contract to try and get someone, because I don't really understand the situation right now in terms of free agency. What do they, assuming they re-sign Fournier, do they only have a mid-level left, or have to sign guys to the veteran minimum? It would be great if they could go out and get a solid backup ball handler, but I don't think the cap mechanics work for them to get anyone other than that veteran minimum. So maybe trading Tristan Thompson makes more sense. But just explain. I clearly am the stupid one on this. What is their actual opportunity to sign a free agent right now, assuming first that they keep Tristan Thompson?
Yeah, so they'll have the taxpayer mid-level exception, which will be, I think it's $5.7 million or so.
You know who's an unrestricted free agent? Ish Smith.
Ooh.
Ish Smith for the taxpayer mid-level. I'm just looking at the available guards right now. Frankie Smokes, TJ McConnell, and Peyton Pritchard as the backup court. There are some guards out there who I think fill that role, but they pretty much you would want to spend that $5 million on one player. And so it's going to be the kind of level of just random vet like that, rather than people have been talking about Lonzo Ball. There's no chance the Celtics sign Lonzo Ball. That just doesn't make any sense. But I don't know. What do you think? Maybe just looked at this, Brad Wanamaker really make the bench a little sturdier. But yeah, what do you think the chances are that they can get off Tristan Thompson's contract? And is there any concern if you do trade Tristan Thompson that leaves you kind of weak at your center depth?
Yeah, I do think there would be concern there, because you look at Robert Williams, he's never played more than 52 games in a single season. Al Horford is 35 years old already, with obviously a lot of miles over his career. I don't think you can trust either of those guys to be 82 game players next year, or maybe even close to it, although Horford's been durable. So having a good third big man is pretty important. Like you need someone you can trust in that spot. Now it could be Grant Williams. It could be somebody like that. It doesn't have to be Tristan Thompson. It doesn't have to be a regular traditional center. But you need someone to trust in minutes on the nights that those guys aren't available. And so keeping Tristan Thompson may not be the worst thing, but I also think because paying your third big man $10 million in a season just isn't great, and because the Celtics could use another ball handler, another shooter, whatever, that I think they'll at least explore the market for him. I don't think his contract has much value, if any, and so that could make it tough to trade, or at least get value back for him. But I think that that if they're smart, they'll be looking to shop their third big and see if there are any interested teams, see if they can flip him somehow for somebody who might make their roster fit a little better than it does right now with him as the third center and making $10 million a year.
I mean, I think it's definitely something they explore, but I think it's interesting. Like, I don't think you're going to get much value back for Tristan Thompson. The thing that's like, I think worth a discussion, and this was brought up by Worm21. Why is Rob Williams never mentioned as a trade asset instead of Jalen or Smart? I think it's an interesting question. I think people talk about the huge transactions. Like, I saw Dame is available, and they're like, trade Jalen, trade Smart. Like, I don't think the Celtics are going to do like a huge blockbuster trade like that. I don't know. Brad has surprised me a little bit over the last couple of weeks, so it might be coming. But, like, I love Rob Williams. I love his vertical spacing. I think he adds a lot to this team. But because he's extension eligible now, and, like, you just don't know what you're going to get from him, he has value. He has upside. If you're really trying to make an impact on this roster and get value back and add talent to build around Jason and Jalen, he's the one who makes the most sense in terms of outgoing players. And so, like, I think it's the same reason why they had to trade Tice rather than Tristan Thompson at the deadline, is because people wanted, like, Tice, and he had a cheaper contract. Like, people are going to want Robert Williams. If you're going to get someone back, it makes more sense to me that, like, you're going to have to, like, actually part with someone valuable. And so, I don't know, like, this is also going to be on the endless list of things we talk about, but, like, with the Time Lord extension, is it going to happen? Or do you think they, like, at all entertain the idea of seeing what his value is on the trade market?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it definitely makes sense to see what's out there, see what you can get, see what his value is on the trade market, because, I mean, really, you don't know what you're going to get from Robert Williams. And he's a real wild card right now, because when he plays well, he can be great. But he hasn't been available very often. His body is obviously iffy. He's had hip issues. He's had, just a long list of injuries after entering the league with health concerns. So I think you don't know what you're going to get from him, and that's why, if you can get something good for him, some different form of talent, you maybe think about it. But I also think of any player on the Celtics roster, he's the one who has the highest ceiling alongside Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. And if he pans out, and if he is able to get his health under control, and if he is able to stay on the court and continue to develop, then he could be a franchise changer. He could be the third piece that they really need, and the third piece who could be around for a long time and fit next to Brown and Tatum and help lift that team the entire time they're in Boston. And so I think if the Celtics do consider moving on from him, they should be very careful about it, because he is obviously their highest upside guy after Tatum and Brown. And
it makes the timing of his extension very interesting because he clearly comes into next year as the starter, but they have to make that decision about the extension now, or it's like next year.
Does he? I
would think so. I think like
Al Horford's good.
I have a T-shirt that expresses that exact sentiment, but. I think it would be I think he pretty much earned the starting role last year before he got
Tristan Thompson.
hurt.
Yes, he did.
That's true, but I still think if you're Al, I think you defer. Like the team goes as far. He's the ceiling raiser. The team goes as far. I wouldn't be surprised if their starting lineup and they went back to double bigs and did Al Horford's their starting power forward. But I think like it is the time. It's like the make it or break it year for Robert Williams. He's going to have as close to a full offseason as possible. I think he's going to start with the starting role. Like he's at least going to get 20 to 25 minutes a night. And so it's the make it or break it year. And like, you would much rather be in the position where you want to give him the extension or the hometown. Like the point of the extension now is you get him for a little bit of a discount than he's going to get on the open market. And so he's going to have this prove it year where it's just interesting where I don't do you just wait for him to prove it this year in that kind of larger role? I think that's probably what they'll end up doing just because it's hard to lock in for that long-term deal when you just don't know what his health is going to be moving forward.
Yeah, that should be an interesting discussion because his peak is very high. His peak is extremely high. If I were the Celtics, unless you can get him on a very team-friendly deal, I'd probably want to make him prove it because if he goes out and has an all-star caliber year or whatever and proves that he can stay on the court for 65 to 70 games at least and proves he can stay healthy, then you'd be glad to pay him whatever. It wouldn't be perfect to pay him a huge deal, but if he can stay on the court and continue his development.
If he earns his money, you just pay him.
Exactly. And whereas if it goes the other way, if he is injured again, if he can't play much, if God forbid he has a more serious injury than the turf toe and the lingering hip stuff, then you won't have the hindrance of paying this guy a lot of money for the next 4 years when he hasn't ever proven that he can be a real centerpiece and stay on the court for you. So I don't know. It's a very, I guess, not too complicated discussion, but it's not a cut and dry extension case. Whereas I think, like with Jalen and Jason Tatum, it was pretty clear those guys were going to be worth a lot of money, and it was pretty clear the Celtics knew they were going to be worth a lot of money. And with Robert Williams, I think he could be worth a lot of money. But because of his history with health issues and not being able to stay on the court, there's a chance that he doesn't really live up to that if he does sign an extension.
I got to give a quick shout out to Seabart. Seabart has been a very loyal watcher and commenter, and all he does in the comments is hate. And I love that energy. That's what this podcast is built on. Is just hating on people. He asks if Jay's wearing a backwards hat or just has a real bad haircut. No, the kid's got wonderful locks.
Yeah, I got beautiful hair. You probably can't tell right now, but I have some gorgeous hair.
The kid comes from the barber, and he walks into the media room, and everyone looks, and he says, "What's up, fuckers?" And everyone goes, "Oh, the kid. We wish we could beat him." And so I just want to give Seabart.
That is not exactly how
I was being very generous in
Although
my
I do say, "What's up, motherfuckers?" That is my greeting.
I just wanted to give Seabart for some because he's been here ever since we started going to YouTubes. He's been in the comments. First, he's coming at my neck. Then he's coming at Jay's neck. Very much encourage participation, even if it's negative. As long as you're funny.
Especially if it's negative.
Especially if it's negative, it's going to be brought up. But especially if it's funny, we will shout you out. We have some ridiculous questions that I just don't know. Someone, Adjectivo 1977, thinks Jason Tatum's nickname should be Ace because it's a pass with Ace and Deuce. And Jay, I know you love nickname discussion. So what do you think about that idea? You're for it. You have a much more positive reaction than I thought you were going to have.
So here's the thing. At first thought, I was like, no, Ace cannot be the nickname. But then I saw the Deuce component, and that changes things. You know, if you start calling him Ace Tatum could never lose. There is no way Ace Tatum is losing a playoff game. You can't convince me he does.
He would need to change his number to number 1, though, for him to be Ace Tatum. Like, I feel like that's the only, like, it has to go with it. I actually had a friend.
Number 1's retired by the Celtics, isn't it?
I mean, I'm sure it is. Every number is retired by the Celtics. Like, I don't remember who specifically number 1 is, but that feels like, of course, it is. I'm
telling you, if you have the name Ace Tatum, there's no way you lose to the Heat in 6 games. Let's put it that way.
I mean, Ace Tatum puts up 50 points on the net. Like, it's a strong name. Ace is a very strong name. I'm all for it. As someone who's been trying to, like, a long proponent of pushing nicknames, I think, like, if you got it, you got to run with it and see if the people like it. And so I'm all for it. I think Ace is a very strong name. The thing that is funny to me about Ace is that I had a friend in high school, shout out to Sean McGann, who just tried to nickname himself Ace. He just came in one day and was like, I'm Ace now. Call me Ace. And that never works. And not one person ever called him Ace.
Hold on. This guy just tried to call himself. He walked into school one day and said,
he just declared that he's Ace. He was Ace. He didn't want to be Sean. He was Ace now. It didn't stick, but if I saw him today, I'd call him Ace.
Yeah. You know what? Now it sticks.
Well, that's the legend of Ace McGann, I guess. So, I mean, it feels like the lesson to be learned is that Ace is a strong name and that anyone who earns the nickname of Ace is a certified killer. Now, Jay, I think like the big question, though, is about the name. Is the name Ace potable?
I think
Anything is potable!